Hi, Jamie.
Hi, Mr. Silvestri. How are you, sir?
I'm doing great. How are you?
I'm very good. It is a tremendous honor for me to have an opportunity to speak with you. I've waited for this for a long time, so first of all, thank you for giving me time today.
Oh no, it's a pleasure. It's good to talk to you.
So let's talk a little bit about Endgame right off the bat here. You have written a lot of music for this series of films, and this film in particular. What's the total running time of the Endgame score?
Score. I don't have an exact number, but I know we recorded over 200 minutes of music.
Wow. So I'm curious when.
Go ahead.
Oh no! Please go ahead.
Oh no! I was just catching my breath with the very thought of over 200 minutes.
Yes, sir. But when you write that much material for a film, is it obvious where there shouldn't be music, or is it a challenge to figure out where there should not be music?
Well, it is a huge part of the process. There's this event in the life cycle of a film called the spotting session, and that's where a director, or in this case directors, sit with the composer and they go through the film scene by scene, sometimes frame by frame, and talk about where music should be, where it shouldn't be, something about the tone of it, and things of that nature. So it is an ongoing process. Sometimes we have music in a place, and after living with the film for a while, we all go, we really shouldn't be playing there. And sometimes it's just the opposite. We didn't plan on putting any music in a scene, and after seeing the film move along in its editorial process and all, we all look at each other and go, we need to do something here. So it's a very kind of dynamic, ongoing process as we score.
And you've written so many beautiful themes, from enchanting themes to very heroic, muscular scores like Endgame. And I'm curious, when you're doing a score like Endgame, is it a challenge to modulate it so that it doesn't overwhelm the drama, but instead complements it?
Well, I think the key to that, or the key to being successful in that endeavor, really goes back to the filmmakers. Joe and Anthony really did an amazing job, along with the writers and our editor, Jeffrey Ford, an amazing job of modulating, it's a perfect word to describe it, modulating the tone of the film. And that, of course, applies to everything from action to quiet to sonically, to loud sonic moments and quiet moments. So for me, I have to really just follow their lead and just try to be appropriate with how they're moving that film tonally. Again, if the filmmakers are really doing it beautifully, it makes that part of it very simple for me.
Mm. Your themes are so legendary in my life. I feel like I've lived with your music for most of my life, which in fact I have. And I've interviewed a lot of composers over the years, and I remember one composer told me that they loved themes as well. They heard in terms of the thematic qualities of the music that they scored, but they have been told lately by studios that they don't want themes, that they feel that themes are antiquated somehow. Have you been confronted with that at all?
Yes, in a sense I have. I think the film world goes through cycles, and I think there are trends and there are even things we could say are fads. And clearly, there have been spans of time where the idea of a theme has just not seemed to be in fashion. It was very interesting because when I was called to do the original Captain America, one of the first things I was told by Joe Johnston and Kevin Feige was, we want a really strong orchestral theme for Captain America. And a lot of composers were not hearing such things when they were walking in to meet directors back then. So, that's kind of how that works out. It's a very true statement this composer made to you. You could have a director who will just, for whatever reason, not want an identifiable theme. Again, for whatever reason, it may be distracting or however they view their film. The real bottom line is the director is the one who needs to guide all of these cinematic elements to some kind of coherent, cohesive whole. And that's a directorial decision. And if that's what the director wants, the composer has to do their best to give them their vision through music.
Yeah. And when you're dealing with Endgame, you had to have known going in that this is likely to be one of the biggest movies of all time. And the level of fandom surrounding this series is just unheard of. Did those kinds of stakes, did it empower you, or did you kind of have to put that out of your mind and deal with the task at hand?
Yeah, I would say mostly the latter. It scared the heck out of me is what it did. And, I've thought about this now. I mean, you do have to find a way to work through your fear. And usually it has to do with having something you're more afraid of. And in my case, I was more afraid of not getting the job done. And it was so much work to do in what seemed to be so little time that I didn't have enough time to worry about the crazy amount of pressure. But it's true, and it's very interesting because I've had the great opportunity of working on some films that could be considered iconic. Let's say something like Back to the Future or something like Forrest Gump. And in both of those cases, I remember the filmmakers, and myself included, kind of feeling like we were making a good movie. And we thought audiences would like these movies, but we had no idea whether they would be successful or not in the world. This is very different, and you described it perfectly. We knew going into Infinity War and Endgame that these were potentially some of the biggest cinematic events ever. And we just understood that and knew that. And it was a lot of pressure. I mean, I marveled, no pun intended, at watching Kevin Feige and Joe and Anthony Russo kind of, walk through the cinematic process and kind of keep their heads screwed on and, kept their eye on the ball and dealt with that pressure in an amazingly elegant way.
Well, another interesting thing about your work in these Marvel films is obviously that the films themselves, they have an arc. And here in Endgame, we've reached a conclusion. But I find the same arc present in your music. I mean, your music tells a story in a kind of an arc as well. And I wanted to bring that back to another film that you just mentioned, which is Back to the Future, where you had a trilogy of films that allowed you a lot of versatility because all three films were so distinct. Is it a challenge for you to find what makes each film distinct and which elements need to remain to recall the previous installments? I don't know if that question makes sense.
No, it makes complete sense. And I did Avengers 1, 3, and 4. And as you say, I did Back to the Future 1, 2, and 3. In all those cases, really two cases, it was very clear to us that we had established something in the first Back to the Future film and in Avengers 1. A theme had been set up. Certainly characters had been established. And so we knew that it just made great narrative sense to bring some of that sensibility forward and keep it present in the future iterations of the ongoing story. That being said, in both cases, the Back to the Future trilogy and Avengers, we also knew there were going to be new things as we went along. Doc was going to fall in love, and Tony Stark was going to die, and they were going to require us not looking for something from the past, but finding something that was designed for these new narrative moments in the arc of these films. So it's a great question, and mostly it works itself out. The interesting thing is we found and all agreed on the Avengers films that it's tempting to go to that Avengers theme because it had become so established and recognizable. And the problem with that is that a little of that goes a long way, and you could find yourself in a situation where you were abusing something by overusing it. And so we were very mindful in Infinity War and Endgame about where we would use that Avengers theme, because we did not want to kind of depower it by overusing it.
I think that's such a great point, because if you did overuse it, it would absolutely dilute its power, I think. And so that was very smart. I just wanted to ask one more question about Back to the Future, and then I'll let you off the hook.
Sure.
Because something occurred to me. Your theme for Back to the Future, as you mentioned, has now become iconic, just like the films themselves, and those scores are so rousing, and you just feel like you're on top of the world listening to them. And yet, when you look at Back to the Future, it's really feels like it's an intimate domestic movie. You
have hit the nail on the head there. It is the great paradox of Back to the Future. And I love the fact that you have talked about that. My very first meeting with Robert Zemeckis was on the set of the Fish Under the Sea dance, the Enchantment Under the Sea dance. It was the biggest shoot in terms of extras in the film. And in the midst of the chaos, he turned to me and he put his hands extended high above his head. And he said, "Al, it's got to be big. It's got to be big." And he was so aware of the fact that he didn't have any big shots in the movie. It's exactly the way you describe it. It's all intimate. The clock tower was shot on the back lot at Universal, and we're in rooms and cars and houses. There isn't a David Lean moment in any of the well, we got a little sense of it in the Western, in Back to the Future 3. But in Back to the Future 1, it was a very small, visually very small film. And so we went in the opposite direction because it was a big story. It was a heroic story. It was about great love. It was about great adventure. It was about the unknown. It was time travel, ticking clock. And so we played it that way. And it was a humongous orchestra. And the combination seemed to work. But it's fantastic that you saw that, because I've actually never had anyone talk to me about that. You're the first one after all this time.
Oh, wow. Well, I'm privileged. I just got to tell you before I let you go, I want to thank you, because your music has enriched my life enormously, and I hope that we can do this again sometime.
I would love it any time, and it was an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much.